Hey everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be my GW27 team selection, and I'm so glad that we finally don't have to be looking at weeks and weeks of drafts to sort of think about iterations of teams, iterations of players. GW26 was filled with, considering who I would go for from a United perspective, a Wolves perspective, if I was to drop, for example, certain players that would be guaranteed for GW29 just to see if I could get any upside. Now, of course, as it turns out, my wild card failed spectacularly. I made a joke on Twitter that for those who prayed for my downfall, they won. And that's sort of, it happens time to time. You wild card, the rest of the field takes hits. They didn't even have 11 players, and I still got well below the safety. 46 points only on a wild card, which is ridiculous. We were close to a little bit of greatness with, let's say, the double Arsenal defense versus Newcastle. Pau, that was just disappointing. Another injury added on the list. We also have the Hwang injury to think about. Tony blanking whilst Wisa, Mope scoring. That was fun. Fernandes getting a yellow card. That was fun. And basically none of my differentials doing well in terms of, once again, Tony, Neto, and Flecken. That was enjoyable. There were obviously some variations of drafts that I had considered, such as, for example, when I went for Ait Nouri within some of my draft structures, when I went for Douglas Luiz. I don't think I really considered Bowen, so hats off to people who went for Bowen. But that's life. You pick certain teams, you finalize on a team, you know that there are various upsides to going this direction or that direction. We were generally trying to look for two Wolves players. We were looking as well for the right way to go around triple Arsenal. And that, for example, the results of that can also change week to week. Who knows? Neto can do well this week versus Newcastle, particularly now that Hwang is out. And he could play, for example, once again in a central forward-like position, which he was actually playing in within the FA Cup fixture after Hwang was injured. So that's something that's interesting. It's piqued my interest for sure. And I still think the structure of my team still looks quite good for Game Week 28. The question, of course, is now that we know the fixtures for Game Week 29, do I move into a free at 29 direction or do I move into a free at 34 direction? Before I actually go through, for example, my draft, of course, the position that I'm at right now is I'm still 852 in the world, still top in the top 1K, so I shouldn't whine too much. But yeah, we did end up with 46 points. What I would like to do as well is to ask for you guys to subscribe if you've been enjoying the videos lately. If you've been new to watching the channel, I do recommend thoroughly watching the cheat sheet series. It's a series where I just recap all the best players in FPL on a week-to-week basis, sort of looking at, for example, the landscape going ahead and how I would tier the picks based on the upcoming fixtures, what managers have said, and of course, our understanding of future sort of projections of fixtures, for example, blank game weeks and double game weeks, etc. If you guys could also have a look at, for example, commenting, feel free to drop your comments in terms of what strategy you're going for this week. I would like to actually know whether you're going for a free at 29 strategy or whether you're going for a free at 34 strategy. I feel like the way that I've moved my team is that it was always going to be 13 for 15, very similar to whether I went for a free at 29 direction or a free at 34 direction, because obviously I was gambling 1 week ago, and now we have a little bit more information Game Week 27. Another point to add, though, is that we will get more information around Game Week 30. So our understanding of Game Weeks 34 and 37 is still a little bit uncertain. So if you're pursuing a strategy, you do have to know that some of the fixtures will still change, and our understanding of the fixtures will still change over the next few weeks, which is something to think about, right? Particularly if you're, let's say, planning to free at 34. I still think at the end of the day, I still am planning for free at 34. When I look at my team, I've got 6 players right now who are confirmed to play. Now, Pau Torres has an injury, so it could be 5. But I'm hoping, of course, that Pau Torres should be fit and available to play on Game Week 29. So we're looking at Pau Torres effectively. We have Tony, we have Watkins, we have Flecken, we have Son, and hopefully, of course, 2 Spurs players coming in over the next 3 weeks. And also we have Doughty. So that basically gives me 6 players now. And I probably, of course, have to go for a Solanke transfer next week on Game Week 28. Of course, a little bit of a early disclaimer. I will not be going for Solanke this week. There's a little bit of uncertainty with him. Of course, it seems like he's fine. I think what Andoni Iraola will confirm in the press conference is that he should be fine. We also got news from a Bournemouth journalist that actually he is fine and that the scans or the concerns were sort of early and everything seems fine for Solanke going forwards. What I do think, though, is that the Chelsea at home fixture is okay for Tony. This Brentford team are not, for example, a dire offense. So I still like Tony's chances. I still think that the weakness within my team is within Fernandes this week, obviously, and also Hwang, unfortunately, because he's out. That does sort of bolster Neto a little bit, just in terms of, as I said, the positional threat and things like that. But of course, it just means that it's very hard for me to field a strong 3-4-3 this week, and clearly a midfielder needs a transfer. But that was always the plan, right? We always planned to go for a Spurs midfielder. I think if, let's say, you have suddenly decided to pivot away from free at 34 and you don't have Palmer, Palmer is actually one of the most, he's the easiest transfer to go for, but right now with my team, if I was to show my team selection, if we start with the defense, I'm planning to go with Neto. I think it's close once again. You have a home fixture versus an away fixture. I still have a little bit more confidence in whatever reason with Bournemouth as a team. Potentially, it's also just watching Brentford in some recent performances and just watching some of the key individual mistakes just makes it very hard to sort of back Flecken unless he's suddenly playing Man City and has to make like 12 saves within a match. So I'm going with Neto here. I still think it's the easier fixture, of course. Burnley, unfortunately, is still one of the weakest teams in terms of expected goals created over the course of the season. So that's a nice positive here. Senesi will also join the team too. Now, if we get some really confident, really positive Emery news from Pau Torres, I might move Pau towards the starting lineup, but I still think it doesn't make sense to field Pau. This is the chance to rest him. They have fixtures that are important coming up, a European aspect to their season, and also of course the Premier League is one where they have to prioritize, of course, top four because they're in the position to do so, and teams like United and Spurs aren't still playing very well. So that's why I'm going with Senesi. Once again, it's just a fixture difficulty here. With Saliba and Gabriel, very easy to lock in. That was the plan with going triple Arsenal and also going double Arsenal defense in specific, to just have two defenders that I would basically play 3 weeks in a row from game weeks 26 to 27 to 28, and they will be doing so. They will be doing their jobs, sitting in my team, and when they blank, they will blank, but they will stay in my team most likely. We'll see what happens, of course. In terms of the midfield, we have two options with transfers. I think we have a Maddison transfer and a Bruno transfer. What you'll notice, of course, is that the amount of cash that I have in the bank is 2.0. So because Hwang is out, and we don't know exactly how long he's out, if Hwang is out for more than 1 week, aka we don't think that he's going to play for Game Week 28, what I will do instead is actually take Hwang out of my team and go for Richarlison. Now, one of the issues that I have is that, unfortunately, Hwang is someone who is quite cheap, and I only have 2.0 in the bank, so I can't go directly from Hwang to Maddison. That isn't something that I can afford right now. So the only way that I can go to Maddison is by going from Bruno to Maddison. However, if it's the case that, let's say, Hwang can't actually field himself for the next 2 weeks on Game Weeks 27, 28, I think it actually makes sense to go with a short-term punt once again to go for Cole Palmer. And that might change my strategy, right? Because what I'm concerned with is the most standard transfer in my team now is Hwang to Richarlison. But if Richarlison is confirmed out by Ange, I will not go for Richarlison, and I think it might actually make sense for me to go for Palmer just for the short-term boost, really, in terms of expected points, right? We talk about a great fixture here with Palmer. The Brentford defense still look poor, and ultimately, Palmer is someone that we still think is an absolute season keeper. The only reason why he's not in my team is because of some of the tough fixtures in the blanks. So when I look at that from that perspective, I really like the Hwang to Palmer move if Richarlison's not available. But as I said, my de facto move is going to be Richarlison. And the priority of my moves would be this: Hwang to Richarlison, number one. Number two, Bruno to Maddison, if we know that Hwang is going to come back next weekend. And number three, of course, if Hwang is out for 2 weeks and Richarlison's out, we go for Hwang to Palmer. And that might unfortunately change my free at 29 strategy to, for example, actually move me into a free at 29 direction. But I think that might be the way to go, just because we don't want to lose sight of the short term, but we also want to make sure that we plan for the long term. Right now, as I said, we have some uncertainty over game weeks 34 and 37 in terms of where the fixtures will fall. So it might be actually interesting to go for someone like Palmer, who I think is still amazing in the short term, but could also work out with me having a weaker game week 29 team, but overall, maximizing the amount of weeks and even, for example, the short term, like this week and also next week. So that's why Palmer is a consideration, but he would be my third transfer option. So for now, the placeholder in this team selection is going to be Richarlison, but keep in mind, of course, the priority is Richarlison, then Maddison, then Palmer. But it also depends on how much money I have in the bank and the Hwang news and also Richarlison news, of course. Son, of course, is very interesting. I think one thing to mention too is that if Son gets to play this match and Richarlison's out, we know Son is going to play center forward. So I think that actually is always going to be a huge boost to our expectations of Son, and that sort of immediately catapults him to potential captaincy option. However, when we are being honest, Crystal Palace are still, in my opinion, a good defense, at least a top half defense. And we're talking about Saka versus Sheffield United away from home and Haaland versus Man United at home. I just can't seriously consider right now, from a captaincy point of view, Son being the de facto captaincy option in my team. Even with the Richarlison news, for me, it's still leaning towards Haaland captaincy. I'll talk about that in a moment when I finalize my team selection. Now, with Neto, of course, we play him over Fernandes because of the fixture difference. It's Newcastle. It's a team that have been horrific on defense. We saw them even concede to Blackburn as well in the FA Cup, a team that aren't even doing necessarily well within the Championship. As far as Saka, very easy play. Son, this is why we kept him on the bench for the wild card. One thing that I'll mention too is a lot of people are thinking about players like Salah. And my only concern, of course, is that Salah for me feels very dependent on the chip strategy you're going for. For example, if you go for a 3-hit 34 approach, it kind of doesn't make sense to me to go for Salah because you're looking at a Man City game, which of course is nice because at least it's a home fixture, but you're also looking at blank and you're also looking at potentially reduced minutes versus Nottingham Forest because he's actually come back from an injury that he's also recovered from and then sort of re-injured himself briefly with. And I don't see Liverpool, for example, exhausting Salah and sacrificing potentially the rest of their season with him in this Nottingham Forest away fixture. So that's my concern with Salah. I think he will play on some sort of minutes restriction. Maybe Klopp will convince us otherwise, but I think if you're thinking about, let's say, a Salah move, be cautious about that. On the contrary as well, a lot of people thinking about players like Kevin De Bruyne. If I was to own Kevin De Bruyne this week and I saw the performance in the FA Cup, but also just know that his fitness is fine and he's cleared to play by the physio and the medics, then I would say, of course, De Bruyne is someone that I would also keep for this game because he still looks like an amazing pick. And ultimately, we're a fixtures sort of manager here. Man United at home is an amazing fixture in the context of the season and how bad this Man United defense have been. So I would keep De Bruyne, even though you might miss the opportunity of something like Son versus Crystal Palace at home. Those are just my thoughts on that. Whereas, of course, with Salah, I think it's worth exercising a little bit of caution. If you're wildcarding, for example, Salah, it's a bit different. I think I would obviously go for Salah on a free at 29 wildcard, but keep in mind, of course, it also depends on how much money you have in the bank. The front line, we have Tony, Watkins, and Haaland. As I said, I didn't really want to go Tony to Solanke. I do think it's a little bit of a sideways move for this week. Yes, of course, there's a huge difference between how we've envisioned Chelsea as a team and Burnley, right? Burnley are one of the worst defenses in the league, but it is, of course, home and away. And Solanke, of course, has a little bit of uncertainty with a knee injury. He might even have slightly managed minutes this week. So that's my slight concern there. And I think I have no reason to sort of throw away Tony from my team. The plan was always to go from Haaland to Solanke on Game Week 28. I will be sticking with that plan. Of course, Haaland can do extremely well versus Liverpool, and I'll have to just take the L there. But I think there's an opportunity for me to move towards Salah on Game Week 30 by doing so. And by Game Week 33, when Haaland plays, for example, Luton, then I can actually bring Haaland back into my team and enjoy and hopefully profit from, once again, another great performance from Erling Haaland. So that's the plan there. Because ultimately, I think if you transfer Haaland out on Game Week 28, you're dealing with a blank on Game Week 29, then an extremely tough Arsenal away fixture, home fixture rather, an Aston Villa fixture, which is also going to be tough, and also even Crystal Palace away, which is, still a top half defense. So 3 top half defense opponents in a row after, for example, a Liverpool game, which is also top half defense, and then a simple blank in Game Week 29. If there's ever sort of a window where you'd not want to consider Haaland within your team, I definitely think it's between 28 and 32. So the way I see it is Spurs' fixtures also get worse after around that time. So it makes sense for me to pivot Son out of the team and go into Haaland as well. Garnacho will probably be waiting for me as well, and that could be an interesting option for me to go for around that time as a make weight towards getting Haaland back in the team if I transfer him out on Game Week 28. So that's the plan roughly in terms of my transfer plans in the future. And I wanted to elaborate on that because I think it's worth explaining what the idea and the thought process is when you have one premium right now. And of course, a lot of people are thinking about keeping De Bruyne, going into Son, going into Salah, and what to do with Haaland as well, and what to do with Man City assets over this sort of tough fixture run. So those are my thoughts. And in terms of the team and the overall sort of structure, the reason why I'm still at the end of the day going for a free at 34 is I like the fact that I have quite a bit more Game Week 29 players than the rest of the field. And when I talk about the rest of the field, we're looking at some managers who probably have, one player from Game Week 29 in Watkins, up to, for example, 4 players. And a lot of people who haven't wildcarded lately should be in that position, right? Because there were teams like, for example, Bowen, or players rather, in terms of Bowen, that a lot of people have been neglecting lately. Bowen, for example, had almost nil underlying stats until this great hat-trick versus Brentford. So highly doubt that he was, strongly within people's teams. In terms of, let's say, the Villa assets, we have injuries with the defense. Douglas Luiz is not even that popular a pick, if we're being honest. As far as Spurs, a lot of people have been selling these Spurs assets, or they have injured Spurs assets like Aporo. So that's an interesting sort of point of view to think about, how much of an advantage am I going to get against the rest of the field? Not just purely the sort of ceiling versus floor argument of the free hit. The way I see it, though, is free at 29, 3 at 34 are very similar strategies in terms of how good and how efficacious they are. I think, you're sort of, at the end of the day, if you're thinking about how you're going to maximize points, the blank game week and the double game week scenario is always very similar in terms of, I think, how much gain you can actually expect to make, right? Because in a blank game week situation, unfortunately, what happens is usually there are one to two players that you don't expect to haul that can haul. And then actually a lot of the elite picks that a lot of people go for, like a Bowen, like a Watkins, will all be highly owned. So it's very unlikely that you'll have an advantage there, but you might have those one to two players that will actually make a huge difference in that game week. So in the context of, for example, previous week, like Douglas Luiz, I don't think anyone was expecting Douglas Luiz to score a brace, but the reality is that, that can happen. And if you have, for example, Douglas Luiz on a fixture like that, and he's only 10% owned, you're going to profit, for example, no matter what with the blank game weeks. Worst case scenario, of course, you just get additional appearance points, which is also a very valid way of getting FPL points, right? So when you're making that bet to gamble for game week 29 free hit, that's what you're looking at. As far as the free at 34, I think the Liverpool double game week is such a good example of that. Ultimately, all the Liverpool assets who actually played the football matches out did extremely well, but you can have really unfortunate circumstances come out, misfortunate rather. And what the issue is with those situations is you might not be able to plan for it, right? You might have the best double game week 34 plus blank game week 34 free hit team on paper, and suddenly it all goes pear-shaped because some of the other picks that we've always been carrying within our teams, like for example the Arsenal assets in game week 25 would do well, or the Brighton assets, for example, with Gross. So I feel like there's always going to be a bit of upside to the free hit here. I think it's clear because we know that there will be fixtures that fall in 34. We know that there is a lack of fixtures clearly on game week 29. So for me, I think it really depends on your team strategy right now. What wild card you're going for as well has a huge impact on that. And my chip strategy video a few weeks back, I still think is very, very relevant to that. I might make an update for that next week because wildcard 28 seems to be quite popular for a lot of managers. And I do want to update, for example, the chip strategy element of things and sort of give you guys the most up-to-date information of our understanding of the fixtures. But that's pretty much it for me this game week. Going back to captaincy to finalize on that and showing my full team selection. So we have Neto, Senesi, Saliba, Gabriel. In the midfield, we'll have Neto, Son, Richarlison, and Saka. In the front line, we have Tony, Watkins, and Haaland. Haaland captaincy for me just stems back to that discussion of how bad Man United have been this season. When we look at expected goals conceded, from an analytics point of view, they've been horrific. If you've been watching Man United play football, from a defensive point of view, they've also been horrific. And like I said, with Haaland, I think KDB will play. Those little things do add up. I do think that City are at home is a huge difference to, for example, home and away. So when you talk about, for example, Saka versus Sheffield United at home, I would much rather, for example, Saka versus Sheffield United at home compared to away. And of course, even though you might say that some of Sheffield United's away results recently have been pretty good, they've been defending pretty well. For example, versus Wolves, they only conceded 1 goal. But the reality is that generally, over the course of time, we tend to see teams perform better on an attacking point of view at home and perform worse away from home. So that sort of edges it to me in terms of the difference between the two teams of Sheffield United and Man United. And then, of course, we have to just talk about how Haaland is still an absolute monster. And it's close. It's very, very close between the captaincies, but I still think it's Haaland for me. And that's it. So thank you guys so much for watching. I appreciate you guys so much. Thank you to the members as well for financially supporting this channel. Take care and hope you have some lovely green arrows ahead and hopefully not as poor a week as I did last week when it comes to wildcarding if you are looking at that direction.